لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما اللهم اجعلنا منهم من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Jazakallah khairan everyone for joining us on this. It's actually really cool to see, I don't know how many of you are on here, like 50, 60 of you on here kind of discussing some pretty important topics and trying to kind of process as a community and as a group what to make of the situation that we find ourselves in. And particularly what I'm going to be focused on is how to remain resilient in terms of our mental health, our social health, and our spiritual health with everything that's going on. So to start off with, I'm actually going to just start off by reciting a surah from the Quran. It's a surah that most of us have memorized already, but I think it's very, very relevant in terms of what we're going through in this moment. And I'll start off by just saying that this is unprecedented and it's different. It's a difficult adjustment and transition for everyone. And when I mean everyone, I mean typically as young people, we're told that like, oh, we haven't been through it before, but other people have. Our parents have, their parents have, like there's this idea that we're used to it. And actually the situation we are dealing with right now is not something that our parents have dealt with, is not something that the world at large has really dealt with in the past 100 years or so. The last comparable situation to this would have been like 1920 with the Spanish flu. So I wanted to just keep that in mind, and it makes sense that we would be unsure of what to do because this is something that none of us are kind of used to. But I wanted to actually start off with the recitation of Quran, and it's a surah that most of us already know. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. صدق الله العظيم. And the surah that I recited is from towards the end of the Quran. It's called the surah of Zilzal or Zalzala, the surah of the earthquake. And the translation is along the lines of when the earth shakes, it's shaking. That's literally how it's put forward. And it's a scene that's described on the Day of Judgment. And when this scene is described, most of us are thinking, okay, this is much later on. This is when the signs of the hour are being found, or the signs of the hour is that the earth actually shakes. In another narration or interpretation of the surah, this is actually literally the Day of Judgment, not even leading up to the Day of Judgment. But either way, Allah says, وَأَخْرَجَتِ الْأَرْضُ أَثْقَالَهَا. When the earth finally reveals whatever it was carrying already, أثقالها, the things that burdened it. And then the thing I want us to focus on is وَقَالَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا لَهَا. And then us as human beings, insan, we say, what's wrong with it? And that's actually the situation that accurately describes what a lot of us are feeling right now, where yes, the earth isn't necessarily shaking, but a lot of what we would consider is earth is shaking for us. Because the earth for many of us is school. That's your regular schedule is going to be, you get up in the morning. When it's not the summertime, you have a very set schedule. And that has been completely shaken for you because why? If I'm not mistaken, most people have been told that you're off until the summer now. That school has just been finished. And if you're in college, that's most probably what you're going through. If you're in high school, that's probably where you're at now. That's changed. What else has changed? People used to have freedom to travel wherever they wanted to. And now suddenly we're being told, no, actually you can't travel anywhere. You have to, unless it's for business or unless it's for an absolute necessity, there's no leisure traveling anymore. You have all of these people that made these plans of like going on a spring break and all these other things that suddenly they're told you have to stop. You are generally have an idea that you can just go to a store and buy whatever you need. And then suddenly your world is being shaken. Why? I can't go and do that anymore. This morning there was an article, I don't know if it's true or not, but an article that said that Amazon's going to stop shipping Prime orders. And for a lot of people, that was like, oh, how could I order something online and suddenly it doesn't come in the next day? Like, that's their earth really shaking. And what I wanted to get into today is, as young people going through this, how do we make it so that even if the earth is shaking, that we are not necessarily shaking? And Allah actually tells us that in the very same surah, and that's really what we're going to focus on. And in practical tips of how do we now use this extra time that we have um, to not be as shaken up as maybe someone else is. And what the imagery in our mind is, it's literally like the earth is shaking. Most people are freaking out, but there's only a specific type of person that doesn't freak out in that moment, and that's who we want to actually become. There are certain people who actually use these moments to actually benefit themselves and the people around them, and that's who we want to really try to be. And those are the people who are mentally fortified. So that's the kind of grounding, pun intended, of this talk, inshallah. And my intention with this is also that I want to leave this open for a Q&A at the end. So if we want to get into kind of having a conversation, okay, now that we've talked about the principles, how does this on a practical level apply to me? We'll start getting into those as well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when insanu malaha, what is wrong with it? What is wrong with everything that we used to rely on is being shaken? And to us, that's what's happening.
All right, we're good. Fine.
What I used to rely on for school, what I used to rely on for work, for many people with their jobs, they've been let go. A lot of you are young, so you might have, if those of you that did work might have been in the service, all of you are told you can't go there. And actually on a spiritual level, what we used to rely on to keep ourselves spiritually fulfilled would be like going to Jum'ah. Suddenly that gets taken out. Going to the masajid for regular prayers, we're told that's not something we should be doing. One part I want to make sure that we emphasize, I'm sure many of you have heard this elsewhere, but it's basically a unanimous opinion from all major scholars and all major people of different disciplines in terms of who've studied medicine and Islamic studies, that the point of congregational gatherings in our tradition is to increase the benefit that we bring to people. And when that's no longer being done, and instead you have the risk of passing on a potentially damaging, if not life-threatening disease to those around you, or helping in its spread, then the potential harm outweighs the potential benefit. So masajid have been closed for that reason, to avoid these gatherings that would spread this infection. So I just wanted to put it out there. Your local masjid might be doing something different, but that is not a decision that was made lightly. That's not a decision that has ever really happened before either. There have been plagues in the past for localized regions in the Muslim community, but for a plague to literally be worldwide, it hasn't really been seen before. So we are living in very, very strange times. So even a lot of imams, I've had actually a couple of imams call in, and it's something that's actually funny. We were saying is a lot of the caretakers right now are getting burnt out and needing caretaker fatigue, because we're all really new to this as well. We don't really know how we're supposed to handle this scenario. But anyway, and it's literally all of us crying out, وَقَالَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا لَهَا, what is going on? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues with ayah 4, يَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا. It's the day in which it will report its news, and it's saying the earth will report its news. We have this understanding within our tradition, and this isn't politically correct to say, but we have an understanding within our tradition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends tests as a response to the situations of people. And that's kind of being found within the surah. That day, the earth will report its news. It's kind of giving a statement of like, this is what they've done to me, so that's why I'm doing it back to them. لأن ربك أوحى لها, because Allah commanded the earth to do so. يومئذ يستر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم. The day that people will be separated into different categories based on their deeds. And this is the part I really wanted to pay attention to. فَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى. And whoever did even a little bit of good, whoever does even a little bit of good, يَرَى, they will begin to start seeing it. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. And the one that did even an ounce of evil, they will start to see it. Why I want to focus on this is, anytime a trial is put forward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to any of us, that trial, or anytime we're kind of ungrounded, so to speak, like an earthquake hits us, the truth of who you are starts coming through. I've had a couple of people reach out to me recently saying that I wasn't really close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but now that I'm confined within my house, now that I can't do what I wanted to, now really feel like I need Allah. Does that make me a bad Muslim? Does that mean that I don't have Iman? And actually, it's quite the contrary. If there was any good left in you, it would come out right now, because that's literally what the point of a test was supposed to be. It's testing the Iman, if it exists at all. And in this moment, you will respond with good, if there was any good left in there. And then, so that Iman is actually very healthy. That is a proof of your Iman, not a proof of the lack of Iman. And on the other side, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. And if there was any evil in it, in a time of difficulty, it will show through. And a lot of us are seeing this at a global level. I'm going to start there. The global level is, subhanAllah, well, I mean, when you think about someone in a starved situation, people do things that they normally wouldn't do. People aren't normally selfish, but when their own survival is put under the test, suddenly you'll have people robbing stores. Suddenly you'll have people, or we have a lesser version of that right now, where they're taking much more than they actually need because they're more worried about their survival than their neighbors having enough toilet paper. Like, that's starting to take place at like a bigger level. Some other injustices that will be, again, when it's a moment of trial, when people are in fear, the big injustices in society start to show themselves. Rich people have access to tests even though they don't have any symptoms, and poor people who have crazy amounts of symptoms, like the weaknesses of the healthcare system, starts showing in, that it's catered toward just rich people getting served instead of poor people. That starts coming out. The bad, you will see it. The bad that already existed within people, you will see it. And on the flip side, if there's good, you will see it. And we're seeing that as well. Communities are coming together. Families are coming together. People who didn't speak to each other at all, they're coming together in this, because what is it? It's going to be, فَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ. If there was any good, you'll see it. Yes, we believe this in the akhirah, but this also means in terms of like our own states, the good that you have, this is the moment to let it shine, because this is that proof, this is your moment to earn that rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the good that we're really talking about here. Now, with that introduction kind of being said, now how do you and I, as we're going about our day, not that everything I said wasn't practical up to this point, but what does this mean in terms of the good that each one of us produces and the evil that each of us produces? I wanted to actually start off with the evil, quote unquote, that each one of us produces. That sometimes we think of things like fear and anxiety as evil. They're not evil. They might motivate us to do evil things or to do selfish things at times, but they themselves are not actually problematic. And amongst the first things I wanted to get into was on this subject was a preservation of our own mental health in regards to this, especially at times in which you're stressed. What many of us don't realize is that our mental health is the reason we term it mental health is because it's very, very parallel to our physical health. Our physical health is made up of a bunch of different things. If I was to ask any one of you, there's too many of you to ask this single question. But if I was to ask any one of you, like, hey, what makes up your physical health? You'd say stuff like, oh, what you eat, how much you sleep, if you exercise or not, if you put yourself into dangerous situations or you get injured a lot. These are all things that make up your physical health. The same thing can actually be said about your mental health, that it's made up of a bunch of different categories. And just like your physical health, a lot of us don't pay attention to it up until either you get injured or a doctor tells you you have to pay attention to it. Because think about it this way, like you're thinking, I'm young, I can just get through life. And then suddenly, let's say you fall in a basketball game and suddenly your knee, every time you bend it, it hurts like crazy. Suddenly you're like, oh, wait, my knee has a system that allows it to work. Or, let's just say you haven't been eating right your entire life, and then suddenly you get a heart attack. When that heart attack hits you, then suddenly you're like, I should have been eating right this whole time. I should have been exercising. It starts hitting you. That same parallel can be said about our mental health. That all of us actually have this part of ourselves, which is like our mental well-being, that has so many different factors that contribute to it. And unfortunately, most of us only pay attention to it when we get into that crisis mode. So when someone is having like a suicide ideation, na'udhu billah, may Allah protect us from that. When someone falls into an addiction, suddenly when their mental health is compromised, we pay attention to it. Right now, all of us are being put into a scenario in which our mental health is being stressed. And whether that be because of the actual fears and anxieties, because maybe you're the financial provider for your family. Maybe it's because you're spending more time with your family than you could have. Whatever the case may be, it's being stretched. And the first thing we got to do is recognize what are the pieces to my typical mental health. And I'm going to break down a few of them for you. The very easy ones to recognize, these are what are known as protective factors of mental health, will be the first three are the simplest: your diet, your sleeping habits, and your exercise. These are going to be super important because, again, I know a lot of you are young and you're like, I don't need to pay attention to this. But you don't realize how much what you eat, how much your idea of a schedule, because you used to go to school, because you used to walk from class to class, whatever the case may be, how much that has to do with just how well you can think and how well you can process information around you. And that's the first thing I'm going to actually stress, is to make sure to be on top of it. I know how I am when I'm in a break. I'm actually technically supposed to be in my spring break right now. I was actually supposed to be in Palestine, but Allah had other plans, alhamdulillah. But when we have plans, we wake up at a certain time, we go out of the house, we eat at certain times during the day. I know what I do when I'm in a break. You wake up really late whenever you want to, you eat whatever you want to, and you barely get up and do anything. You're just sitting there watching Netflix or sitting there watching a show or movies. That can't be our reality. That's amongst the quickest ways in which we can start destroying our mental health. Will be actually if we completely let go of any form of
Not
schedule.
me. Ronnie.
Thank you. So that's amongst the quickest ways that you can get rid of it, is those three. Now I'm going to get into some of the more hard to track ones. Other parts of your mental health that you might not realize is, of course, going to be the social aspects of mental health. When you talk to the people around you, one is going to be your family, making sure you have a good relationship with them. The next is going to be your friends and your social circle. One of the things I've noticed people doing is because they're locked at home, they're only interacting with members of their family. And it's good, your family needs you. We'll get back to that. This is really the time to show good to your family. Why? Because again, this is on a spiritual level, this is your time to increase your rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by serving your family. So that's definitely there. But on the other front of your social interactions you have with people, I know neighbor nets across the country have been canceled. Or if not, have been taken to like a web type of place. One of the things I want to let you know is what would normalize your typical mental health was the ability to see your friends and hear from them. And right now that's compromised because you can't necessarily see them physically. One of the things I want each and every one of you to do is those 5 to 15 people that when you talk to them in person, you guys just like, I don't know what's the term you guys are using now, but there's like that vibe check that you can just figure out. You can understand exactly what they're going through and you're going through just by shaking their hand, just by giving them a hug. Make sure to reach out to them. And the reason I say that is I've been getting texts this week from actually some of the YM guys that it seems like I have no actual friends. My friends only reached out to me when I used to go to NeighborNet. My friends only reached out to me because we had a class together. And now that there is no classes anymore, now that there is no NeighborNet anymore, no one reaches out to me. Because we have certain needs when it comes to our social needs of how we process information. Some of us are scared, some of us are disappointed at of what's happened. I know some of you were planning on taking standardized testing. I heard today that all standardized testings are not going to happen this year or something like that. And that's terrible. Some of you had spring break plans which are completely fallen through. Some of you have families that are giving you a lot of trouble because you're spending so much time at home with them, and everyone is on edge right now. You need to have people in your life who you can talk to about that. That's a severe protective factor, is to have social outlets in which you can get through your hopes and also your fears. Sometimes we think that the way to get rid of anxiety is to not think about it, about something else, think about something else. But actually, if you ever went into a therapist's office, oftentimes they tell you the opposite. It's exposure therapy. Let's actually talk about what you're afraid of, and let's get it down on paper. What are going to be the consequences of this happening? Because when we're able to talk about it with someone else, oftentimes it helps us process it ourselves. If you don't have the ability to do that, like writing it down is a recommendation. But for you guys, I'm going to say every person should have like those 3 or 4 people that they call in and check on a daily basis. Just check up on them, make sure they're okay, so that everyone has this coverage. And this applies to people in your own same social circle. This applies even more so, of course, to the people who depend on you, those who are more at risk when all of this is happening. You need to make sure to have enough empathy left to give them. But part of how you earn empathy is by being able to confide in someone, so that you have the ability for other people to confide in you. So that'll be kind of on a social level, what things you can be doing. On a spiritual level, I'm not going to focus on this all that much, but I will just get into this. In almost every psychological study, it's been shown that a connection to a God or a spirituality of some sort is a positive protective factor, meaning that it allows you to be more resilient when it comes to trying times, that you don't get compromised in regards to your mental health. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was dealing with a stressful situation, or the community was dealing with a stressful situation, he would tell Bilal anhu, call us toward adhan, give us istiraha bis-salah, allow us to rest with the call to your prayer. And literally the Prophet ﷺ would recommend people to put their heads onto the ground when they do sujood. Why? Because it gets you physically grounded, even when the world around you feels like it's shaking. So of course, connect yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I made this joke in a khutbah last week, and apparently people are using it online now. Quran team. Like that, if we're going to be quarantined, we might as well turn it into a Quran team. I'm a dad, so I'm sorry, dad joke. But get yourself much more resiliently attached to the Quran. Make sure that becomes like a daily habit for you. Because again, what is it going to do? It's going to cement for you that no matter how the world changes, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change. So get yourself there. And of course, this is a perfect time as well, right before Ramadan. Isolation is amazing. Why? So you can get yourself Quran team, get yourself a solid relationship with the Quran. What this also means will be your relationship to adhkar. One of the things that I think I used to reflect on all the time when my days in YM is I was really attached to communal acts of worship, but I had no idea what to do when I was left by myself. We're really good at attending qiyams. We're really good at fasting and breaking our fasts in groups. We're really good at attending halaqas. But when it comes to sitting down and just talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're lost. This is a time to really practice that. And the better we get at that, the more we're going to be resilient in terms of having stamina to get through the next couple of weeks, to get through possibly the next couple of months. So that's going to be there. Now I'm going to get into some that most of us don't really recognize, but other protective factors are being able to appreciate beauty. What I mean by that is people who tend to have hobbies that really speak to them, in terms of like people who are into architecture, who are into cars. I would say the bigger example of this is people who are into nature. When they go outside and they can just appreciate nature, and that gives them some sort of calmness, that's actually a very positive thing. There are mental health professionals in European countries that if someone has showing signs of depression or anxiety, one of the things that they recommend is they'll write them a prescription to go walk in a national park. And you'd be like, wait, what? They show up to a national park and then they hand the prescription over to someone, and they'll have a tour guide walk with them. And the park ranger will basically just point out, look at those squirrels over there. Look at that tree. Look at that. Look at that. He'll be just pointing to things in nature. Why? Because as we witness the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that actually allows us to be a bit more a bit more centered, a bit more resilient in terms of our mental health. That's something that a lot of us should keep that in mind. And this could be anything. This could be architecture. This could be cars. It could be hobbies that you have. There's some of you who are like sincere geeks, who like watch a review video of every new phone that comes out, even though you're not going to ever get all of them. Though I wouldn't recommend that's the best use of your time, but that would be an example actually of appreciating good design when you see it is actually considered a mental health protective factor. So make sure to kind of do that. Another one is tactile creation. You know why fidget spinners were a big thing a few years ago. And why were they? Because they were considered good for someone's concentration, was because it was something tactile that you could hold, and it wasn't necessarily something you could create, but even better than that would be if you got the ability to create something. Start adding a couple of what I'm saying. You don't have to do all of them, of course, but add them little by little. So that you have the ability of being more resilient and being able to provide for the people who are kind of around you, first and foremost for yourself, and then also being able to help those that are maybe going through difficult times. Some other ones will be, being into the arts. Again, we don't give this as much emphasis within our community. Unfortunately, the Muslim community is really bad at this. But this is where in our tradition, we're supposed to be all over the place. We were a tradition that when we wrote in calligraphy. When we recited with maqam. Why? Because we had an appreciation of the arts, and that's something you should make sure to have within your own life as well. These are just a few of the protective factors. I could go on with these, but the idea is recognize what used to be, what you had in a typical week that allowed you to feel healthy. You know, when you have one of those weeks where like everything is on point, that's when your mental health was on point. You need to make sure to identify as many of those as you can, so that you can make sure to continue through with them in these more trying and difficult weeks. And what needs to be emphasized here is if you don't necessarily do this for yourself first, it's going to be really hard for you to help others. One of the other elements of this, one of the other protective factors, is the feeling of being needed. And that's a really strong one, that we serve the people around us. That's actually a way of protecting yourself as well. This is where like the Prophet ﷺ would recommend people of like, oh, when you feel like you have nothing, look for someone who has less. Why? So that you somehow help them in some way. Because in helping someone is you are actually helping yourself. But the caveat to that is when a plane is going down and the oxygen masks come down, what's the first thing they recommend for you is first make sure to put the mask on yourself before helping the person next to you. Why? Because if you are going to pass out, you're not going to be able to help anyone anyway. So keep that caveat in mind, that we need to make sure to take care of ourselves in these moments so that we can be there for the people who are kind of around us. Because we are all going to be tried, and all of our health is going to be strained a little bit. But this is an opportunity to also earn the, you know how people say like you earn character, of like anytime you do something you don't want to, it builds character. But that's actually true, but replace character with ranks with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like you're going through something, our scholars used to always tell us it's expiation, it's expiation, it's expiation. Why? Because if Allah is testing you for something that maybe seems unfair to you, Allah would never do that unless Allah had something better kind of intended for you. And that's how we recognize this, is we don't allow this to change our perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're supposed to say, Allah is still Ar-Rahman through this. What in my life needs to change? Was I too comfortable with what I had? Was I too reliant on Amazon? Was I too reliant on school for my social well-being? Was I too reliant, and this is going to sound kind of strange, on masajid for my iman with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Maybe that was the case. Be like, okay, this is my opportunity to wean myself off of that, so that when I regain it, I'm going to be even more grateful. One mistake that a lot of us make is we focus on a blessing after it was taken away, not while we had it. Every single time Allah takes away a blessing, there is another blessing that is found within it. And we need to look for what that is. إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. That with every hardship, there is an ease. We need to kind of look for that ease and have people to process all those eases kind of with. So those are just a few of the things that I wanted to go over with. Make sure to understand who your virtual company is as well. I know everyone is in like news fatigue because the situation changes hour by hour in terms of like what is going on, what are the number of cases. Sometimes I'm not telling you to unplug because it's important to be up to date on these things and listen to the professionals as these guidelines are being put out there. But what I am telling you to do is don't have the only intake of information be all of this negative stuff. Make sure to also reach out to friends and family and talk about things that are important in terms of like talk about memories that you've had in the past, talk about plans inshallah what you're going to do next year, um, talk about your hobbies. That's going to be really important because we're not getting as much face-to-face interactions with people, so we got to supplement that in some way. And of course use these moments that you have um, to really focus in and hone in on your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've entered into the month of Sha'ban, which is a month right before Ramadan. This is a great time for each and every one of us to kind of really focus on Ramadan as ourselves individually and start challenging each other. Maybe this could be, we don't have neighborness anymore, but it'll be like a memorized competition between all of us in terms of like, we can compete in good things in these times in which we might not be able to see each other on a face-to-face level. So with that, I've been talking for a little bit too much. I didn't get through all of the protective factors I wanted to, but we've hit about that 40-minute mark. I wanted to go ahead and open this up to questions if anyone has any questions about anything we've talked about right now, or if something didn't make any sense. So that's a very good question. How do you deal with someone who maybe has some bad mental health practices, and you can kind of and you can recognize them? Well, one major thing will be to recognize. The answer to this will change depending on who that person is in terms of your power dynamic with them. If that's a younger sibling, it might be to actually tell them what it is that needs to change. If it's a sibling who's very close in age, the blanket answer will be model what good mental health practices look like. Model as in be really good about how you deal with your hobbies, how you talk to your friends very regularly, how you reach out to them and confide in them when things are difficult and confide your hopes and your dreams with them. Model that, and the hope is that they were going to reciprocate it. But on the other hand, it's a parent, and oftentimes it is a parent. Calling them out is not necessarily going to be the best thing. It's probably going to be just model it on what, and sometimes even do those activities with them. If they haven't taken a walk for a long time, let's just say, if it is, I'm going to use the example of if it's someone's physical health. There's one thing you could tell someone, hey, you need to work out. There's another thing of like, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's go pick up this together. Start modeling that so that they're able to go take it on in their own personal practice.
Yeah, I had a question. I don't know how much this pertains to your Halaqa, but I was like wondering like what you do to like combat like false WhatsApp news that like everyone's getting sent to them.
False WhatsApp news that everyone's getting sent to them. I don't know if this is an appropriate answer, but this is something that I've done. Again, it depends on who sends it. Unfortunately, I'm on many groups in which I don't know everyone on the group. So when that's sent, I actually don't call it out. I just ignore it. But when it's someone I know who sends it, I'll reach out to them personally and figure out like what's going on with them. And just have a conversation on like, oh, what were you planning on doing this week that you can't do anymore? Because if they're spending so much time on WhatsApp, one of the things I'm finding is it's because they have no one to talk to and they're really scared. That when people don't have correct processing tools within their life, they lash out in really weird ways. That's one of the things I realized. I did this actually to someone 2 days ago who's constantly on WhatsApp. And in like 3 groups that I'm in is constantly posting, and it literally took a conversation, and it was because they hadn't told anyone that they were really like they had this elaborate family thing that they had planned, that everything fell through on it. And they're now financially concerned that they're not going to have enough for their they were planning on moving. There was a lot going on with this person, and just sitting there and listening to it, I actually noticed that on the WhatsApp groups I'm on with them, that started reducing pretty significantly. So it'll be, how do you do it? If you don't know them, I don't know that there's anything you can do other than ignore it, so to make sure you're not getting damaged by it. On the other front, if you do know them, reach out to them and figure out what's going on in their life that's making WhatsApp the mechanism of them to kind of lash out and vent out. it's important for the stress to them the importance of getting like good quality news. In terms of like the Quran tells us over and over. Well, it says in Surah Al-Hujurat that anytime there's news that is significant, verify it. Don't spread it before you verify it. So make sure that these lessons kind of impart them or their way through, and like just having a conversation of like, oh, where did you get this from? I'd love to read more. And there's the style that you approach it with is probably the most important thing. So like if your parent or is someone who's sending this, is like, hey, can we figure out where this is said from and research it with them until it becomes apparent that maybe the news has no basis in reality. One point I did want to mention here, which is actually very relevant. I know some of us have vices that we're working on in terms of there are things that you do that you're not necessarily proud of. One of the things to really watch out for is in a moment of stress, remember the other side of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. The evil becomes extremely prevalent, and you see the effects of the evil that you used to do, or the evil that you do becomes really apparent. And what I mean by this is if there is a certain addiction, if some of you have a problem with things like lowering your gaze, if some of you have a problem with anger, if some of us have a problem with our tongues, if some of us have a problem with backbiting, that will increase like crazy right now. And we need to really, really be careful because that's what happens when the earth beneath us starts shaking. We start trying to ground ourselves, and sometimes we ground ourselves, unfortunately, in the sins that we do, not just the good things that we do. So we got to be kind of on alert. I wanted to mention that and make sure that we hit on that at least a little bit. I see a question that was typed in. What if you're one of those people that feel like you don't have a lot of people reaching out to you and don't feel like you don't have a lot of people reaching out to you, don't feel like you have people to talk to about things in your life? What's your advice for them? Jazakallah khairan, please. So if you're one of those people that you don't feel like people are reaching out to you, one of the best ways to start doing that is you reach out to others. And again, this starts at home. I want all of us to recognize that there's spheres of influence that each one of us has. It'll first be our parents, it'll first be our siblings. Reach out, make sure that they're doing okay, and there might be some reciprocation that if you reach out, they're going to ask for you. And then start branching out little by little, but you take the first step to reaching out to people. And typically people reciprocate. And if you're finding that people are not reciprocating, I think this ends up being a bigger issue of maybe the relationships that I've built up have been one-sided. Maybe, and I'm not going to get into a whole conversation about codependence, but sometimes people have personalities in which people keep taking from or people keep giving to without ever kind of having that reciprocal relationship. That starts to happen. This might not be the best time. This might not be the best time to actually reassess that or try to change all the relationships that you have. An axiom that one of my teachers used to say is, we build a house in order to withstand a storm. It's really hard to build a house in a storm. That might be something to reflect on later. Maybe not rely on people as much then, and rely more on, in terms of my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my hobbies that I have, walking in nature, making sure that I'm physically kind of fit. Those might be what I rely on more than I rely on other people if other people seem to just keep hurting me. And, how do you know the line between having tawakkul, between doing the means and having tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? A lot of us have heard this hadith before, that a person came up to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, should I tie my camel at night or should I rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the Prophet ﷺ's response was amazing, as it always is. The Prophet ﷺ said that tie your camel and then rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's kind of how we do both. Recognize that you will be held accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on your effort, not on the outcome. And that's really what we're supposed to do. You do everything within your means or the efforts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for you, and then you leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be the balance of, I do everything within my means, and then I still have a better expectation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a better expectation of the situation than my means would have given the ability for me to do. So that's the answer to that. Inshallah, I hope that helps. Another question that I see here, because it seems, or actually in addition to that question, means I take people have more means that should take, not going outside. I see. And in this case, in terms of catching the disease, follow the best pieces of information that you have. In terms of the people who we rely on for this type of information will be the medical professionals of our community. And the best people will actually be the ones who are medical professionals, plus have a knowledge of of the deen. But if I was to actually choose between the medical professionals and sometimes just like a local imam, I would actually, if there's a difference of opinion amongst the imams, I would follow the opinion that is most closely aligned with the medical professionals. But most medical professionals and imams in our community actually are recommending the same thing, which is take the precautions that you have. I know a lot of us are so attached to like shaking people's hands all the time. Don't do it, because that's a way for this to spread. We really want to go to the masajid. And I think there's a lot of hikmah in the stance that our scholars have said is we need to not go to masajid, because honestly, this happened at the last Jum'ah we did on a campus at Rutgers University. It was already going out there, like, don't shake hands and don't hug people. But like, dude, when you see someone you haven't seen all week, when you see someone you haven't seen in a month, you just want to, we're friendly people. We just want to give them a hug. So this is where we kind of separate, and what we should keep in mind is we follow the guidelines that are put out there. And alhamdulillah, our tradition, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this in it's a narration by Musa al-Ashari. It's actually the first documented documentation in history that we have of anything that we would call a quarantine. He told the Sahaba that if any of you hears about a plague, don't go into that land. And if any of you are in a town in which there is the plague, don't flee from that town. It's the idea of a quarantine. So use the best medical information that's available and follow that. And also make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say, Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afiyah fi dunya wal akhirah. Oh Allah, I ask from you good health in this life and in the hereafter. You just kind of keep asking for that. Why? Because again, we do whatever we can by the means, the effort, we put our effort forward, and then we expect from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the same time. Some things I should clarify on here. Some people are treating this like Bird Box. If you haven't seen that movie, don't. But to the point where like I can't even open the window and go outside. No, you can go outside. The only thing that's being recommended here is not to be in large gatherings, because in large gatherings you have the ability of passing on person to person. Droplets or moisture from your mouth as you speak gets passed on, people might breathe it in, and that happens a lot more in confined spaces with a lot of people. So that's why masajid have been told not to do. It doesn't mean that you can't go outside for a walk. It doesn't mean that you can't go on parks anymore, go out to parks anymore. You can do all of that. You can still go outside. That shouldn't be a big deal. And that's the guidelines, from my understanding, of the medical community that's being put out there. Can you give a summary or list of the protective measures you mentioned? Wanted to make sure I remember all of them. So I can give you a couple of lists as well in terms of professional sources that have put these together. The ones I mentioned were the really simple ones. Eat healthy, sleep. Yes, Ibrahim, you can, well, basketball is going to be a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure about that being the best, because there's a lot of physical contact between people. So I'll get into that in a second. But eat healthy, sleep, make sure you exercise, make sure you have the ability of appreciating nature or appreciating beauty of some sort. Make sure that you have good relationships with your family. Physical touch was one of them that was out there, and this is going to be specifically for your family. That quite literally, if we turn this into a neurochemical conversation, when you touch someone or when you shake someone's hand or give them a hug, your brain releases oxytocin, which is a neurotransmitter that's very much connected with like good feelings and feeling connection. Other ones that I brought up was physically creating things, using your hands to create something that you can actually touch or build. Other ones that I mentioned were I forgot to mention this, but intergenerational conversations. talking to someone who you can give your complete empathy towards. And this means like either really, really young people or people who are a lot older than you. So think grandparents or like babies. That's why, you know how like if you're sitting in a room and a child walks in, alhamdulillah, I get the opportunity to experience this a lot. I have a 3-year-old daughter who I'll be sitting there and talking about the most like severe topic. It'll be like a description of hellfire. And then she'll come in here and be like, Baba, or something. And then everyone is suddenly like, "Aw." What's actually happening right there is you're giving her your complete empathy. So people who you can give complete empathy towards, that's going to be another protective factor for you. What other ones did I mention? For those of you that remember, you can start writing them in, because there's like 13, 14. A schedule, having a schedule about your day. Having consequences, direct consequences for your actions. That'll be another major protective factor. That's what many times school got us, was a consequence for our actions. If we did well, things happen. If we didn't do well, things didn't go well for us. But that's another major protective factor that a lot of people have going for them. I see them actually being listed here. So the ability to process your hopes and your fears with someone, and feeling the ability of contributing or feeling needed. That not only is it that you're doing things for someone, but they feel like you're doing things for them, but you feel appreciated both ways. So those will be a few of them. And of course, add one major one will be a relationship with Allah. Like a relationship with Allah where you feel like it can increase and can decrease according to your own actions. Definitely. There are a bunch of different ways that we can use to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The two major ones I will say is listen to Allah and talk to Allah. And I know this sounds very basic, but what I mean by that is, when do we listen to Allah is the Quran, and when do we talk to Allah is dua. It's a two-way conversation. It's a two-way conversation. So Allah speaks to you, and you're expected to answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by speaking back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the easiest way to actually start this on a very practical level, and I think oftentimes we discount things without ever trying them. But literally at the end of your day, talk to Allah about if you got closer to Allah at the end of the day, or you got farther from Allah at the end of the day. Literally go through your day, like after you've prayed Isha. Of course, go do your fara'id as well, but this will be a supplementary thing. After you've done your fara'id, maybe before you're about to go to sleep, recount your day and then ask yourself sincerely, Ya Allah, I got closer to you doing this. I got closer to you doing this. I got closer to you doing this. I got farther when I did this. I got farther when I did this. I got farther when I did this. If you can start getting yourself to do that, that gets you to start developing a very conscious relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one that has consequences, meaning I feel better when I talk to Allah and I know that I've done stuff to get close to Allah today. And the opposite starts taking place when I haven't done that. Sometimes when we read Quran, we don't feel like we necessarily connect with the Quran. Maybe it's because we don't understand what's being said. One small recommendation I can have, and this is also one of those things that when you Quran and teen yourself, take an English translation of the Quran and read the English translation of the Quran. And what you need to do is, as you're reading every single line, maybe only do like 2 pages a day or something, but every single time you see a mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, underline it. Underline it. And the reason you do that is, if you start looking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the Quran, you will start finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outside of the Quran as well. So little things of like active reading when you're reading the Quran will also change your relationship there. Yeah. That's a very good question. This will, just like I said with the person beforehand, when dealing with others, the first thing we need to do is recognize what our position actually is. Do I have the ability of giving this person sincere nasiha or not? And I think nasiha is a lost art. What I mean by that is, we're in this like don't judge me bro culture, where like you do what you want as long as I'm not harming anyone, that's up to me. And that's an unfortunate just mentality that people fall in. I don't think that's not our understanding of what a siddiq is, or someone who shows siddiq with you. Someone who is your siddiq, it's one of the 12 words for friends in the Quran, is someone that you can tell the truth to even if it's going to bother them, or even if that truth hurts. But that's unfortunately not the level of relationship we have with people oftentimes. If you have that level of connection with them, I would say it's a time to have a very tough love type of conversation, but make sure to bookend it with something positive in the beginning and something positive at the very end. That should be there, because one of the roles of the prophets were they were bashiram when they were also nadhiram. Bashir would be they give good news, and nadir means that they warn. So sometimes they did warn, and sometimes we have to be people that warn. But on the other side, most of the time, if the person isn't ready for your sidq or your truth, what you need to do is, again, recognize your position. Maybe I'm not the best messenger for this message. Maybe I talk to someone who would be a better messenger, and they actually talk rather than I do. And on the complete other end, sometimes it's a family member who, if we tell them again and again, it seems like we're nagging them. One will be, make sure to practice what you preach. That's a prerequisite. And on the other side, when someone isn't fulfilling their full potential, they're the ones who are losing out. They're the ones who are missing out. And one of the things we need to realize is the effect of not doing that will eventually catch up with them. And our responsibility in that interaction is to make sure that, hey, I've indicated that you're not reaching up to your full potential, but I won't keep nagging you at it. Because once that eventually catches up with you, you might want to finally reach out and figure out how to be the best version of yourself. But maybe at that point, you won't come to me because I'm just a negative influence in your life. I'm just someone who makes you feel guilty. The biggest example of this I can give in the Quran will be Yaqub alayhi salam. Most of you, all of you have heard the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. It's a favorite in YM Halaqas. But one of the aspects of Yusuf alayhi salam's story that's so interesting is Yaqub, the father of Yusuf alayhi salam, Yaqub alayhi salam, he's very disappointed in his children. Most of them. Why? Because for all he knows, they have killed one of his kids. But there's something interesting that Yaqub alayhi salam does. He tells them that what they have done is wrong, but he never stops being a good father to them. And what I mean by being a good father is decades later, when they're about to leave for Egypt, Yaqub alayhi salam tells his kids, when you go to Egypt, make sure you all go through different doors. Because if you go in the same doors, you might get, people might be jealous of you and people might do something bad to you. That sounds like the most typical fatherly thing to do. And what I mean by that is, I know when I'm about to leave the house, my mom and dad, I'm in my 30s at this point. My parents still tell me like the last parting piece of advice before I leave. That's the most typical thing that a father would do. He still did that even though his children had disappointed him. And that's what I mean by that. That's why when they finally figured out that they were wrong, they turned back to their father. Because we're people who believe the sins or the lack of someone not living up to their potential, that has a weight that's associated with it. You want to make sure to tell them about it, of course, but you also don't want to change their relationship so much that they will never come to you in their time of need. And the example I can give of, let's just say someone has a drinking problem. There's two things you could do. You could say, I'm never going to talk to you until you stop drinking. That's one thing. And I've unfortunately been on the receiving end as a counselor of someone who comes in and says, I really want to quit and I really want to rejoin my family, but I could never go back to my brother or my sister or something. Why? Because they're just going to say, I told you so. That's one person. The other person goes, I don't like that you're drinking, and I think your drinking is terrible and it's destroying your life, but I'm still going to be, you're still my sibling. What happens with that person is once the effects of drinking catch up with them, because we don't think things are forbidden just for the sake of a random list of what's forbidden and what's allowed. Things are forbidden because they destroy someone's life. Once that catches up with them and they're going to need a lifeline, they're still able to rely on you as a lifeline. First thing I have to say is if they're feeling it, it could be because there's some truth to it. And we all need to constantly check our intentions. That am I doing it because this is legitimately a good thing to do? Am I actually spreading khair, or is me pretending to spread khair actually causing internal evil to kind of fester? So the first thing we always have to do is ask ourselves, hey, would I be doing it if I wasn't the one not necessarily benefited. Let's put it this way: can I pass this on? So we have to ask ourselves honestly: are we the best messengers at times? I found myself, especially when I was younger, falling into this trap over and over again, where there's like this self-righteousness complex of I'm the only one. Oh no, if I don't do it, no one will do it. And here I have to just push back a little and say sometimes we're not the best person to do it. Then it's good to admit that. And the way to realize maybe if you are that person, you try to pass it on, and you find that there's no one to pass it on to, but you tried to pass it on. That's when you again correct it for yourself of, okay, no, I tried to not be that person. I tried to get someone else. I tried to not say this, but now I'm kind of brought back into it. That would be the first check: is there actually a legitimate way of that maybe they're right, maybe I am not doing it for the right reason. Second thing would be, this will be like the example of Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhu when they were teaching that elder how to do wudu. The style that they approached it, the big question that should be asked is, am I maintaining the other person's dignity? One of the sunnahs of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is he never destroyed what he planned on inheriting. The Prophet ﷺ, when he conquered Mecca, he could have humiliated all of his enemies, but he planned on inheriting their allegiance. So he didn't actually humiliate them. If anything, he honored them, so that when they eventually came to their senses, they honored him back and they gave him their allegiance willingly. And the same thing here is, how do I maintain someone's dignity? The reason I brought up Hassan and Hussein is there was an old man who didn't know how to make wudu properly. And Hassan and Hussein, they were in their youth, they were like 10 and 12. They could have just went up to him and been like, hey, you don't know how to do wudu, here, let me teach you. But instead they go up to him and say, we were arguing amongst ourselves because about this step of wudu, could you teach us how to do wudu? And as they were talking amongst themselves, the old man realized it's not they who needed me to teach them, but they were trying to teach me, but they wanted him to maintain his dignity. So the bigger thing usually is, how do I do this in a way that people's dignity is kept? And if I'm constantly watching out for the other person, not my dignity, but the other person's dignity, we normally find ourselves in the right place. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the way to answer that is recognize that there's more than one thing that influences you, and there's more than one thing that influences them. That if you find yourself, there's always be a mutual involved in things, or they speak a language that you don't find appealing or you don't find appropriate, right? Let's just say someone swears all the time, and you're spending time with them, even though you would never swear, you would never use bad language, but you're spending time with them, that has an effect on you. You're normalizing swear words in your own mind, so you're more likely to use them. Best way to counter that is make sure you also spend equal amounts of time, if not more amount of time, with people who speak with eloquence. People who, when you speak to them, they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you do that, you are reversing some of the damage that might have been done. And to make sure that if you're going to put yourself close to a fire, make sure you have the means to extinguish that fire. So at the very least, it takes out some of that damage. And on the other end, also make sure to do personal work with yourself. That what you're doing in that company doesn't follow you to what you're doing in your own personal kind of practice. So the typical thing is there's more than one influence on you. It's not just who you hang out with, and if it is, hang out with people who also pull you towards in an appropriate direction, so that you're not just being pulled in one way. And if the conversation comes in, well, I don't have time, I only have time to spend with one of them, then make sure your personal time is so severely pulling you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they can't really pull you in another direction. And I'm being told, inshallah, with that was the last question. If I can be a resource to any of you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Someone within your leadership has the ability to get in contact with me. So feel free to do that. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those that get purified through these trials, and not that these trials are a means for people to get purified from us. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be people that see the good that exists within us and use these moments to shed the evils that exist within us. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be people who serve the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we raise in the ranks of the Creator. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma ja'alna minhum min alladhina amanu wa aminu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. Inshallah, I will see you all when I see you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.